Hey, everybody. Thanks again for joining us at the Prayer Culture Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking to Chad Clarkson with the Houston Church Planting Network. He's going to be talking a lot about why it's important to build a culture of prayer in your DNA, especially from the beginning, if you're part of a church startup, a smaller church, even a bigger church. So we're going to talk about that, as well as the month in prayer of fasting in February that we do as a city in Houston to really just see what the Lord wants to do and how the Lord has impacted the culture through that. So make sure to check it out. This is the Prayer Culture Podcast, where we talk about building prayer into the lives of Bible-centric churches and individuals. I'm your host, Michael Green. I have a background in missions to the Islamic world, as well as being the founding member of Curamore, a ministry that is dedicated to developing a deep culture of prayer within local churches and communities. My co-host, Patrick Rowe, is a board member of Curamore, as well as being a longtime church planner in the greater Houston area and Thailand. This is the Prayer Culture Podcast. As a reminder, the Prayer Culture Podcast is a ministry of two or more, which is a crowd-funded ministry. So if you enjoy this content, please check out our website and giving page listed in the description. Also, when you have a second, hit the like and subscribe button. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Prayer Culture Podcast.
You're
Pod
so
Chad.
Good at this.
I'm so good at it.
The Pod Chad.
The Pod Chad.
That's what it's called today. The Pod Chad.
The Pod Chad. Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Prayer Culture Podcast. Today, we've got a very special guest. I'm going to let Patrick introduce him.
Yeah, Chad Clarkson here with us today from HCPN, Houston Church Planting Network. Glad you're here, man.
Man, great to be here with you guys. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, you're here because we love you. We love your ministry, what you've been working on real hard in Houston for a lot of years. A lot of respect for you. And we know that, you know, your views on prayer and how prayer culture is built into churches and church planting, that's been super important to you. And you've especially, I would say the last couple of years, you guys have been working really hard on this exact issue. So really glad you're here for that. So if you would just for listeners, if you would just kind of, you know, what's your prayer journey? How did this become so important to you? If that ends up getting into your ministry and that kind of stuff, that's all great.
Well, and first, can you say what HCPN is so people know what that is, and then tell us your prayer journey?
Yeah, HCPN, the name of it's the Houston Church Planting Network. So something we started back in 2000, end of 2009, probably early 2010, when it started to kind of begin to get some legs and a little bit of an establishment of an organization. And it wasn't really, we had like, hey, here's a creative plan, here's our strategic plan of the Houston Church Planting Network. It was really about, all right, how can we be about Houston? Looking at that time as a city about 6 million, now it's, over 7 million. How are we about church planting? Seeing that as our strategy to see Houston impacted with the gospel, and then really a network. And we used even the term at that time, a network of networks, but how do we see multiple groups that are working together to plant churches across the city? So that's been our dream. That's what we've been after really the last 12 plus years, and seen some God do some cool stuff over that time. And like Patrick said, I think even one of our journeys right now has been prayer, even going deeper with that. So for going back to your question, like my personal prayer journey, thinking about that, it's probably, as I think back, it's like now I lay me down to sleep. Type thing. I mean, I remember being young, growing up with Christian parents, and even at night, saying my prayers. It was a regular thing every night. I remember either praying with my mom or my dad. We'd recite that. Now I lay me down to sleep. But
really? Like you really recited that?
Now
prayer?
I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Yeah, it was a regular thing. And then almost like a time of intercession. It wasn't like my parents said, okay, now you prayed that. Now, dude, let's intercede for people. It was like, all right, now I'm going to pray for mom and dad, brother and sister,
that's cool.
Grandparents, what other things going on. So I think that was the beginning, of kind of learning how to pray a little bit. And even the posture with that. Like we would actually like kneel beside the bed. So it was like kind of a kneeling posture.
Wow.
I grew up in a church that had a prayer meeting. And we were at the church. If my parents did, I'm sure my parents would say, hey, we didn't do a lot right, but the things they did right, if the doors were open to the church, I was there.
Yeah.
And I don't hate
tater tot casserole on Wednesday
oh
night.
man, had a few of those green bean casseroles, all sorts of stuff, you name it.
I will say it's nice to hear that, Chad, because I hear somebody say that negatively often. Like, we were always, the doors were open, we were always there. It's really nice to hear somebody.
Well, and there were probably
in a positive
times
way
that I
say that.
thought, like, why the heck, again with church? Awana camp Sunday night, Wednesday. I mean, literally it was 3 times a week. But it's interesting now. I love the church, which is interesting to think about. I mean, maybe there's people that had that experience that now they're like, they hate the church.
Yeah.
But that wasn't my experience. Had great, relationships with people, and by no means was it a perfect church, but they prayed. And so I remember sitting in a lot of prayer meetings, even though I may not have participated. I'm probably a fly on the wall even as a kid sitting in some of those. So that was probably early. So I was around it. As far as learning to pray, I mean, those were some early experiences, as a kid growing up. But I think about probably when I went to college. So the first couple years of Bible college, I was in school, and it wasn't like, oh, here, take this prayer class. It was really a guy that mentored me. He was actually my basketball coach at college as well, named John Reeves. And that's probably where I really learned to pray. And so it was, and what he would do, he'd bring a group of guys together, and I remember several times praying in his office. And he kind of even had a pattern where, he'd have us, it'd be like, say the 3 of us were praying, and it'd be like, all right, it's my turn to pray the truth. The line was, pray the truth about yourself. And so, like, we'd be, and again, here's a posture thing. We were often laying down, laying down the floor, and we'd be, praying the truth about ourselves. And there's something powerful if I'm authentic, and praying that, and you guys are listening into that. So I'd pray, and then a couple guys are then praying for me, and then it kind of rotates. You're praying the truth about yourself, then I'm praying for you, and I think it just created a level of learning to be authentic with God. As far as prayer goes. So I think those are some early times that I think about that have still kind of impacted me now, and even, discipling or mentoring other people, and the importance of prayer. As I've gotten older, as far as journey, I mean, I think you just realize more and more the importance of prayer. It's probably moved from me to, what's a good way to say, praying for impact to praying towards more intimacy. That kind of a move from impact to intimacy. Where I remember, like, even, hey, I want my life to be impactful. I want to make a difference. I want our ministry to be different. And now it's like, all right, I mean, I want those. It's not like don't want those things. But it's a lot more probably related to, all right, are you developing an intimate relationship with God? Do I want Jesus type thing versus just, certain
That's
results.
So
So that's probably been some of the pattern and journey, along the way a little bit.
I love that. That's so good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of what we emphasize with two more is abiding prayer. Like, hey, prayer is more than just asking for things.
Yes.
It's deep connection with the Lord. He wants to engage with you, right? And as you're engaging with him that way, he's going to reveal to you, oh, here's the things that are really on my heart that I want you to really pray into, like the persistent widow. Like, pray into this thing. So I love that. So, Chad, tell us about the HCPN month of prayer and fasting.
Yeah, definitely. So this is something we started 8 years ago, and we've given a name to it now. We call it Awaken Houston. And so for the last 8 years, we just said, hey, we're going to have a designated season of prayer and fasting, probably because, a couple reasons. One, if you study like revivals, if you study even church planting movements, I mean, what always seems to be at the impetus or the beginning or the genesis of those things are people are praying. People are praying together. So we talk about, where movement happens is kind of at the crossroads. Jeremiah Morris got this line from him. I think it's great. He's pastor at 7 Mile Road. He talks about movement happens at the crossroads of bold, unswerving gospel proclamation and corporate, united, urgent prayer. And so that's kind of how we've been thinking about it. And so kind of that urgency, what does it look like to pray together, with the city and with other churches? And obviously every church is, they have kind of their own prayer initiatives, but we kind of wanted to do something where we're saying, hey, we want to pray for a move of God in this city. So kind of over the last 8 years, it's been kind of probably threefold. One, it's kind of included an element of personal renewal. So we use the word renewal in terms of, all right, what God's doing in your own life. as far as developing a relationship with him. And we've talked about revival, wanting to see revival. And for me, I know people use that word kind of in different ways, but revival is like a church thing for me, right? It's kind of like living again. So, if you were never revived, you can't be revived type thing, right? So it's like, all right, what does it look like the church to be revived, in the newness of the Spirit and walking with the Lord and, things like that. And then praying for an awakening, hopefully as the revival happens, then we see like movement on kind of the society or culture as a whole and kind of use that word of awakening. So that's kind of why we call it Awaken Houston, to kind of say, all right, God, we want to do something. We want to see you do something here in the city that can't be explained by, clever strategies or anything like that. But God, this is your thing. So that's kind of what and we'll do a season of it, really for the last, this will be our 8th year of doing it. So
awesome.
Wow.
Do you feel like you've seen like success in that? Do you have any stories of where it's like impacted the culture?
That's a good question. I'm not going to say like, oh yeah, here's what the mayor did because of Awaken Houston. Probably not that far, but I think we've seen some cool things. And I think one of the things I've seen probably the increase of churches that are praying. Even last year, there was a series of kind of prayer meetings during the actually as we wrapped up Awaken Houston that were happening kind of around the city the same day where churches were kind of gathering to pray together, which is a cool result of that. So I think some things have happened, even as I see more and more. I'm on a lot of church planting and past, like different churches' email blasts kind of over the years working with church planters. So the number of them, especially kind of this season as the year starts, that are focusing on like 30 days of prayer, 28 days of prayer as the year starts, has been encouraging to me and encouraging for the church. So it's always, not always, but it's been an important, I think, initiative. Calling it initiative now, but important for us with HCPN. And I think it goes back. We were talking before we got on the air, just kind of global, as we've had experience in the global church. And for me, I think when we started what now we call Awaken Houston, it really came out of trips to Cuba. And so been down and kind of with the church in Cuba a lot and just impacted about the way they pray. I remember talking to planters, talking to a couple guys who were planting a church, and we were talking about, like, hey, what's prayer look like for you? And they go, oh, we'll gather a couple hours, in the morning, we'll pray underneath this tree. And I'm like, oh, great. What day of the month do you do that? And they're like, no, we do that every day. We're gathering every day to pray for a couple hours. And it's like, okay, I get it. And then some of our partners down there in Cuba actually started a 50 days of prayer. This is actually where we first got the idea, kind of for their country, because they wanted to see movement of God. And so they would do it from Easter to Pentecost, those 7 weeks, 50 days. I don't remember what they called it, but it was really 50 days of prayer for our nation. Wow. And, I love how it leads from the resurrection up to really kind of looking at the birth of the church with Pentecost, so that season. So I thought, man, that's great as you think about church planting, because that's what we want to see. We want to see God do something. So that's kind of where it got its beginnings. And then over time, now this month, we've kind of, changed the season over there. And so this month, it's the month of February. For Awaken Houston. And so every year we have a little bit of different themes. So kind of our big canopy, we call it Awaken Houston, but then kind of different themes. And so this year it's February 1st to 28th. We'll pray for those 4 weeks. And we've got an acrostic. We just spelled out Houston. Again, we're not the most creative people in the world, but we have an acrostic. And so like we want, hey, if we can pray for these things each of the 7 days. So the H is we want to pray for hot hearts and holiness. It's kind of our H. Again, it goes back to personal renewal, starting with Jesus. O is we're praying for our churches. Again, it goes back to revival. Like, how are we seeing our churches be revived? U, we're praying for unity. Going back to John 17. We want to see a unified church here in Houston that is kind of moving the same direction. S is, I think we're calling it Spirit's power. So obviously we want to see a God thing, nothing we can strategize. Let's pray for the Spirit's work. T is we're saying top 5. So who are the people that that are far from God? Because we also want to have at that crossroads that kind of gospel proclamation push. So praying for the top 5. The other O is our city, praying for God to do something. And then N was new birth. So we want to see people hopefully come to know Jesus, right? That's
Love it.
kind of how we're praying. So yeah, so if anybody, I know I feel like I've talked a while on the Awaken Houston stuff,
you're
but
good.
I mean, we want churches, individuals to join us. We do a daily devotional with that too that we send out.
Awesome.
So to kind of get people praying the same way, just for kind of that season of prayer. So.
Is there like a web link or something people can
Yeah, it's
go to?
Awaken Houston. You can go to, I think we own the .org and .com domain names. On
Look
top
at
of that,
you.
look at that, yeah. So
We'll,
you should be able to go to either of those.
Yeah, we'll drop
to
that
jump
link
on.
in the comments
Okay.
here so you can check it out and get connected. And so I'll just give you a little affirmation. I've been part of a church that did Awaken Houston last year.
Oh, cool.
And they're doing Awaken Houston again this year. And it was really valuable, along with 2 or more, helping them like get a vision for prayer, to really just push prayer as an emphasis in that body. Like, hey, we have to meet together. We have to be praying for these things if we want to see them happen.
Yeah.
And God's been doing, just since then, Awaken Houston last year, God's been doing some like really cool supernatural stuff, especially in the lives of lost people.
Wow.
That we specifically prayed for at that church, that are just coming to Christ right and left. I mean, last night we baptized a former Muslim who, the Lord brought, through like dreams and words. Like, it was crazy how the Lord brought him. So that's all through prayer. And so
That's and those stories always don't get back to me. So it's great, like, as I'm kind of
There
getting
you go.
goosebumps here thinking about it. So yes, that's fantastic to hear.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The thing I love about your emphasis, what the Lord's made important to you, is, which you mentioned it just briefly, but not the reliance on strategy to reach the city, or, we have all these goals. If we really stop and think about the things that are our goals, it's like, why would we ever do anything but pray?
Yeah.
Because this is stuff, impossible things, things that you can't just do. You can't change people's hearts. You can't convince people of what's true about spiritual things. Devote your life to God who became man and died for you 2,000 years ago. Like, this is wild stuff. And strategy doesn't close the gap there. So the reliance on the Lord in prayer is just, it makes all the sense. As a mission movement, a church planting movement, if prayer isn't at the heart of it, then you're just spinning your wheels.
I hear you. Yeah.
You can be very busy, and you could put a lot of great stuff on your website, but the fruit is going to be lacking.
Yeah. And that's been, and we talked about prayer journey early. I think that's been part of my journey and discovery, because naturally, like, I love thinking strategy.
Sure.
So I love, like, all right, let's put together a strategic plan. Like, what do we need to do? And so it's important, I think, keep going back to the book of Acts, because even as you think of, that Acts chapter 1, right? Jesus, after the ascension, the disciples end up in the upper room, and it's like, all right, Jesus has just laid out, all right, here's our strategy. I want you to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. I'm like, all right, we're going back to the upper room. Peter grabbed the whiteboard. Let's start putting a plan together, right?
Yeah.
Let's get after this baby. We got work to do. And what'd they do? No. They went to prayer, right? They talked about being, went to prayer, and then it talked about verse 14, being united, really being all the men and women together. They were praying. And so they're praying, they're united, and that's really what, a prelude to Acts chapter 2, or at Pentecost. So just kind of the reminder of, like, hey, that's what we need to do.
Right.
So,
That's where all the power comes from.
So prayer and even fasting, why do you think they're essential to church planning efforts?
Yeah, great question. And so if you read, David Garrison has a book called Church Planning Movements, and they've kind of studied church planning movements all over the year. And he says all over the world, in different seasons, and the number one characteristics is there's an extraordinary amount of prayer. So the hope is, like, we don't just look at that as like, oh, because that's number one on the list, we need to do it. Again, going back to the strategy thing, but how does it not only like a strategy, but also is it like a vitality thing for us as people? So that's kind of the heart behind it. And I think for church plants, like, we talk a few things, like, as we're training church planters, we talk about, if it starts with you, really, as the church planter. So if your church is gonna be a praying church, you have to be a praying church planter. And there's no way around it, because you can't take your people somewhere that you really haven't gone. So we talk a lot about, like, all right, what does that look like for you? Being a person of prayer, making it a priority. You've planted church, so you know how busy it is. You know how much there is to do. So we talk about the priority of prayer over the other important things that you need to do as a planter or current pastor. I mean, or anyone in ministry. I mean, there's stuff to do all the time. So emphasizing that priority of prayer, I think it starts there. I think that's why it's important in church planting. I'd say another reason is, or another thing we encourage planters to do early is really developing like an intercessor team from the beginning.
Okay.
To just almost like, all right, you have that covering of people that are praying for you. So that's something we emphasize as you go out. Like, all right, here's an assignment. Fill out your Excel document, numbers document, whatever you're using. Create names of people that you're communicating with, how to pray for you. So we talk about, all right, developing prayer partners, developing an intercessory team, and even having kind of that inner circle or 2 or 3 people that, hey, I just left this meeting. I need you to pray right now, type thing. So kind of different levels of people praying for you. So we talk the importance of that. We talk about the importance of then mobilizing your prayer team. Lots of times people establish them and then they're like, never communicate with them. It's like, we need to know how we're praying. So we talk about that a lot and the importance of that. And I think the final thing is we talk about, and again, we talked about a little bit ahead of time, but developing that prayer culture as a church. And so how are you developing really your team? Because even as church plant, one of the things we're talking to church planners about is like, when you go to plant a church, we want you to think of yourselves, you're not the only church planner. You're really developing like a team of church planners, right? Think of your launch team or missional core, whatever word you use. Say, hey, this is the church planning team. And so in that, we want everybody. I mean, like Jesus said, I want you. I want to make you fishers of men, right? Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men.
Right.
So kind of that. So it's about helping people follow Jesus, so that they can really see people reached with the gospel. So part of following me is like, all right, teaching people how to pray.
Yeah.
And when I've seen church plants, my buddy who I mentioned who taught me to pray in college, he's also a church planter, John, and I think he's probably the best I've seen. He's like a serial church planter. I think he's done it 9 or 10 times where he's actually moved and started another one. And I would say how he does it is through prayer and teaching people how to pray.
Wow.
So that's what he's been goaled at. And, we're trying to train church planners in that. It's like, all right, how do you develop that culture? You're teaching people to pray. You're praying with them. So things like that, I think, is part of developing a culture. We encourage, even as part of the culture, you're like developing, you're praying prayers that are visionary. You're praying prayers that are targeted. You're praying prayers that are expectant. Things like that. You're not prayers that are outward. I mean, you're not just praying for as you bring your team together. You're not just praying for Aunt Lily's big toe that's her. You got to have outward prayers that are on mission. So I think that's important. And as you're bringing teams together, as you're developing like a team as a church planning team, people get that it's contagious as you're developing a culture, because lots of times, all right, you're praying and then you're praying for people you're developing a relationship with, and stories are being formed that you're praying for. And if you don't have stories, you just kind of realize, man, I need to not get my act together, but it's like I better step it up type thing. Yeah. And so I think prayer and evangelism are really tied in together there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find one difficult dynamic with something you mentioned that I find in a lot of churches and plants. You said you're making a team. Mm-hmm. It's easy to kind of relegate, because you want to do the whole, like, there are different parts and differently gifted people. So one is a gifted prayer warrior probably in your team. Mm-hmm. How do you make sure that, especially like leadership, are saying we are committed to this thing? Because there are prayer is something everybody should be doing, mm-hmm. Kind of like evangelism, discipleship is kind of a whole package thing. And certainly there's going to be a pace setter who is gifted in that, who's really leading the charge for it. Mm-hmm. But I found in churches where leaders don't get involved in prayer, generally there's no prayer culture DNA built. Mm-hmm. I even had one guy recently who's part of a church, and initially it was like, oh, this is the prayer guy. He's like, wait, no. Yeah. We should be the prayer guys. We're the eldership team. We should all be prayer guys. And so do you have any ideas about, like, okay, how do I keep it from happening where it's like we just relegate to this person who is the prayer person, but like make sure that it's a cultural DNA thing where we're all part of this, fighting in intercession together, spiritual warfare, seeking the Lord's face. Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, I mean that's a great. I 100% agree with that. And so sometimes it's like, and I mean, lots of times I don't want to say there's too much pressure on a pastor by any means, but sometimes it's like if the church is going to be a worshiping church, you have to be the lead worshiper. Like we talk about that. If your church is going to be sharing the gospel, then you have to almost be like, all right, the lead evangelist a little bit. If your church is going to be a praying church, you got to be lead prayer.
Yeah.
But obviously you can't maybe lead all those things.
Sure.
But you do have a voice in all those things, right? So, I mean, if you're preaching, I think it's important to tell stories of what prayer looks like. If you're leading meetings, I mean, you're leading those like the prayerful posture, or even, spending time praying, with the meeting. So I think it's consistently coming out. I think also all those things, whether it be evangelism or prayer or worship strategies, also need like systems behind them. And so it may not be you running the system. So maybe you need to develop teams that are doing those things, but also I think you need to be the voice. So if that makes sense. So it's kind of a both and, but so hopefully you're raising up, teams of people that are helping drive that, but you're not delegating completely where you're like, all right, I'm not, I'm out of the picture because it's gonna,
Yeah, there is kind of, with church planting in particular, there's that hard line between like, this is kind of apostolic work, you're hopefully, if church planting isn't kind of apostolic, then you're just hoping to shepherd some people who are already saved and they had a church and now they like yours better or something, But if it is apostolic, then there's this expectation that the first guy on the ground is going to be, he's got some kind of responsibility to kind of lead in this, and at least point everybody in all the right directions, And that may not be his primary gifting, but he's got to do something about it,
Yeah.
He's got to prioritize it and emphasize it. As much as it's important to the Lord, it's got to be important to him. And that, but there's such a fine line there because you can't be everything.
Yeah.
You're not just a body unto yourself, like there has to be this expectation for the planter that whoever the Lord brings to be a part of this body is necessary to the body. There's some part of the body that is not here yet. And so we're going to kind of do the best we can and rely on the Lord's grace, and whatever's important to the Lord has to be important to us. But somebody's going to come along that the Spirit's going to be gifting in that way, empowering in that way, and they may become the leader. But then you can't just wait and do nothing until that person shows up. So I appreciate what you're saying. It's like there's not this pressure on the planter or on the, a pastoral leader, if there's like a senior pastor figure or something. It's not that there's all this pressure on him to be everything, to be the best at everything, to lead everything. But maybe it just comes down to, if it's important to the Lord, it has to be important to you. You've got to give some attention, some effort, some, you know what I'm saying? Otherwise, you're just not emphasizing something that is important to the Lord. And it feels like prayer can get kind of relegated, as you said, to that like, well, when that prayer warrior comes along, we'll have a prayer ministry. Not that anyone would say that, but that can be kind of what we're feeling, It's like, I'm the lead teacher or I'm the lead evangelist. And so those things get a lot of attention and emphasis, and then prayer is like, oh, well, yeah, we should pray before we go.
We should all be praying, of course.
Yeah, of course we should all pray. It's this like some assumed thing, and you wait for that person who it's really important to, and it's got to be really important to the leader from the beginning. Yeah.
Well, Patrick, I'm going to ping it back to you because you plant churches, and it seems like for a long time, even from Genesis to where we're at with Open Doors right now, you've wanted to make prayer part of the DNA. And like Genesis, I saw it a bit, like the effort there. And then at Open Doors, the way that it's like playing out is like prayer is a key part of our whole time together. It's like integrated into our whole time. And you like drive that, but you have the buy-in of everybody that we're all doing this. How do you do that?
How did you do that? I think, well, it goes to what you said, Chad, which is you, as the leader in the room, you have to be convinced of your own need for Jesus, your own desire to have this intimate relationship with him. You have to have your own genuine humility and dependence on the Lord, and let that be contagious, you know? So I appreciate leaders who aren't maybe the most dynamic, strategic, just command the room. But what you do notice about them is that they're here for Jesus.
You can feel it, can't you?
Yeah. It's just all over them. I mean, and then you've seen hundreds of church planters come through HCPN, come through your residency over the years. Let me throw it to you. What do you notice early on about the difference between the super dynamic command the room guy and the dependent guy, and then what their churches look like going forward?
That's a great question.
And feel free to name names.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. I got names popping in my head, so I am seeing more and more church planters with that posture, which has been
so
great.
encouraged
That
to hear
it's
that.
like, hey, this isn't my church. This is Jesus's church. We want to see him do something again. That's awesome. And so with that, there's just a dependency. So one of the phrases we use with HCPN is like no swagger allowed. So there's that walking with a limp mentality. And so when planters, kind of have that limp, it's like they realize that there's like, all right, they need to have a dependence on God. So even as we're assessing church planters or looking for ones to, hey, who do we want to work with HCPN and trying to develop, it's like, that's what you want. You want,
Right.
guys that are hungry, that are teachable. Again, going back, they're limping a little bit. They're dependent on Jesus.
Right.
And again, you can feel that.
Yeah.
You sense that early. It doesn't take, a genius to kind of get a sense of that from a few conversations.
Because it's a spiritual thing. It's spiritually discerned. You just pick it up on people. So what I feel like, Michael, is if you are genuinely just dependent on the Lord, you're convinced of your need, then when you go, this is something that started for me several years ago, where I would be about to teach, and the Lord would give me this moment. Every time we'd be like, in the last song before I'm going to step up before people and teach them the Bible, I would have a crisis, an absolute crisis where I'm like, I can't do this. What am I trying to do?
Just the weight, feel the weight of it.
Yeah, you feel the weight of it.
Yeah.
It's like all of a sudden the weight of what we're actually wanting to happen here is God himself is going to teach all of us something about himself. And that I can't do that. So I have to be sitting there going, oh God, please make use of me. I know I don't have my own power to do this. I need your power. And if that same feeling of dependence and humility, it's just realistic.
Yeah.
It's just a realistic view of yourself and of God and the need and what we're really hoping for. If that infuses everything, not just stepping up to teach, but when we're talking about evangelism, when we're talking about our physical needs, when we're talking about reaching our community, loving one another, being unified, all these. And no matter what the topic is, if everybody looks at that goal, this thing that we know God loves and God wants to do, and we go, we can't do that, then everybody just has to go, okay, Lord, please do this. Boom, you're praying.
Yeah.
And that's just, you're on this constant, you're just living there in that place of like the things that we really love and want are just too big for us.
Right.
We just want to be, we've got to be standing with Jesus and go, Jesus, can you do this, please? We want to be here for it. To me, that's just what prayer is. It's just constantly just looking at God going, oh, you got to do it,
Right.
loving what he loves
Yeah.
and asking him to do it and just let you be there for it.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, so Chad, we've talked a bit about prayer. Fasting, that's part of what you do with the February push and everything. Why fasting?
It's like, how bad do you want it?
Oh.
You know what I mean? So fasting,
That's good.
Fasting
Yeah.
for me is like, all right, how bad do I really want something? So that's part of it. I realize that's not all of fasting, but that's a big part of it for me. So when we talk about adding that element to the Awaken Houston, it's like, all right, how bad do we really want to see God move in our city? Like, am I willing to miss a few meals for it? Type thing. So when I think about fasting, whether it be I'm fasting for during the Awaken Houston season, or fasting for another thing going on in the ministry or our family. That's, for me, it goes back to dependence, like another level of dependence. And when you feel those hunger pangs, it's like, all right, how bad do I want it? So,
Yeah.
That's really good.
I love that.
So when you guys have this fasting, do you actually enact kind of a plan? You have a plan for churches to follow, and what does that look like?
No, it's different. So we'll put some fasting resources on our website that are there, like, whether you fasted before, it's a first time, what is fasting, things like that. And then it's like, we kind of treat it's between you and the Lord. It's like we haven't done like we said encourage people to fast during this. You determine how. I think, it probably should involve some sort of skipping a meal. I don't, not going to say don't eat for the next 30 days. I'm not going to say that, but what does that look like for you? So that's where we've kind of left it up for whoever's following along. Hey, encourage you to maybe add this element on to as you pray along with us.
Right.
So
yeah, and you know how bad they really wanted it, because how skinny are they at the end of the month?
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to fatten up through Christmas and January. So,
right.
It'll look like I've done
There
something.
you go.
Oh,
Strategy.
man.
That's great.
Yeah, fasting. How bad do I want it? Oh,
I like that.
that's so convicting. Thank you, Chad.
Yeah.
Man, sometimes I don't want it that bad. Lord help me.
No, I hear you. I like that chocolate chip cookie better than I want it. Yeah. Revival in our city.
Oh.
And I've made that decision for the chocolate chip cookie before. So yeah.
I love that because it's very simple. We did an episode on fasting and we talked about multiple reasons, and that was kind of part of it. But I love that simple, just like ask yourself that question.
Yeah.
How bad do I want it?
Right.
How important are these lost people in my life to me, or the revival in the city, or the things God wants to do and they're on his heart? How important are they to me?
Yeah. And the intimacy part of it. And I can't remember if you said this before or after we started recording, but the difference between the intimacy or what was it you said?
Impact.
Or impact, right. Yeah, that too is part of it. It's fasting for intimacy, not just fasting for impact. Like as if fasting kind of twists God's arm to do something, he's like, oh, okay, if you want it that bad. But more like fasting also creates intimacy, which is super valuable, more valuable. You'd have to argue more valuable than what is God going to do for us, So there's that angle too. And I just appreciate you saying that and you leading out in that. And the Lord's put you in a unique position with HCPN. I know the network's not just you, but he's put you in a place of leadership there, and he's just impressed this on you in a way that honestly, it feels like fasting and prayer, those can be clunky, awkward ministries.
Yeah.
We don't always know kind of like, what are we going to ask for? Is God going to do it? You can't guarantee the results, So pressing people for it, inspiring people, it can be difficult. Do you find it, how have you found the kind of risk reward element of pressing real hard on prayer and in fasting, and like the difficulty of it and clunkiness of it with getting things going, and it doesn't always feel so supernatural, special, whatever. But talk about the risk reward of just engaging on it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, because this will be our 8th year, and it feels like, clunky is a good word. Like we've continued to do it, and it's like, we ask ourselves every year, was that worth it? Because it's a lot, it's all right. You're recruiting people to do devotionals, it's organization, it's taking time, things like that. And I think it is, even though we maybe haven't seen. It's cool hearing stories, Michael, like you shared, like going on at your church, and hopefully there's more and more of those that are cropping up, which I think there are. Like I feel like the image I have right now is like it's been like a boiling pot of water. So I think, for us, and this may not be with everybody. I mean, I realize there's things happening around the city, around the world, that who knows what God's doing in different places. But for Houston, for me, it's been like, all right, let's start praying. You turn the heat on and you see nothing, right? Like you're seeing this pot and hopefully it's getting warmed up, but you're checking did I turn this on or what's going on?
Right.
And then over time, and that's where I feel like even the last couple of years, even the last 18 months, it feels like I'm seeing more of these kind of bubbles kind of beginning to pop up a little bit, and hearing more and more like, different things that are happening, around the city, different things with churches. And the dream is that all of a sudden, we're going to have a boiling pot right here in Houston, where we got these circles that are, happening, where things are just popping all over the city. So that's kind of the dream. So, but in that, it still feels like, all right, it does feel a little clunky, but at the same time, it's like, all right, God, that's what we want. That's what we're going to keep praying for, and that's what we're believing you for.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's almost like, I think prayer is what kind of prepares people for revival and awakening. It's like kind of that preparation. It's like, all right, I'm not bringing revival. You're not bringing revival. That's a spirit thing, right? It's God doing it. But I think he uses prayer to kind of prepare his people for something to happen. So that's kind of how we're looking at it. We're going to keep doing it. We believe in united prayer as we study, if you study revival movements, awakening movements, down through history, it's like time and time again, it seemed to start with people praying. And so that's our commitment. And a lot of organizations, are committed to prayer, but I feel like it's been a growing thing with HCPN. Obviously, we're about church planting, but we want to see the city impacted. And so that's one of, missiologists tend to talk about like 5 key elements that you need to have to see really a city kind of impacted or transformed with the gospel. So you've got the strategic church planting, you've got disciple making, you've got the mercy and justice type ministries, you're seeing healthy leaders develop, and then there's prayer. There's united prayer happening. And so we've kind of designed those like in a tree element, kind of a tree picture. And for us, kind of that root system is the prayer, right? It's all about, it's the foundation by which everything else happens, but it's also kind of that root system that's hopefully going down in our lives, going back to the vitality, the intimacy with God, things like that, that we want to see happen. So, we're still we're still going to do it and believe. I'd love to see something, happen in our lifetime in Houston that we're going to be up in heaven talking about, hanging out on a wall somewhere. Like, man, wasn't that cool what God did through the church praying? And again, I think there's things happening that we're probably not even aware of.
For sure.
But, we're designed for more too.
Yeah. That's really good. It's, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, just briefly, but things being important to the Lord and therefore important to us. I think that really helps with things like prayer ministry, like what HCPN is doing. When you turn the heat on, you're praying, and there's no visible evidence that this is heating up. It's not boiling it, which God, he can make something boil without us doing anything, But it's important to the Lord that we turn the heat on and keep it on, and that pot of water is never going to boil if you keep turning it off, on. That doesn't boil water, but just a lot of heat on for a long time boils the pot.
Come on.
And that just matters to the Lord. You just read the scriptures, and all the time that the Lord did something when people prayed, and he could have done it before, and he didn't have to do it when they prayed, but when they prayed, he did it. And that just means that matters to him. That's why we do it, because he loves this, It's not like pray because you need something and God can do it. And so to get the thing done, pray, It's like pray because God wants this. He loves this interaction. He loves to respond. That just matters to he's that kind of God.
Yeah.
And that's why we do it, which gets to the intimacy part. Is you're just doing relationship with God as he loves it.
Well,
it's good.
I'll encourage you. You already said something where the impact is happening. As you said, there's pastors. You're seeing more and more pastors who are passionate about not my church, but this is all of us doing this together. That's the impact of prayer. We've had multiple church planners, pastors, worship leaders on this podcast, and one thing they're all saying in unison that I'm hearing is the secret place is essential. And God loves that. Jesus says it on the Sermon on the Mount, right? Don't do all this stuff just, before men. You got to start with just me. And so it's like, as a leader, if you're planting a church, part of the DNA that you're planting is not just, we just pray when we're together, but if you're meeting with God in a secret place when no one else sees, well, and doing all this stuff, you're evangelizing, you're reading your Bible and studying, doing everything that makes a Christian life vital without being seen. That's going to make all the difference. And that's going to keep the church you're planting from becoming legalistic about everyone must be at every single prayer meeting, or they're not holy, or but at the same time, hey, it's important that we come to the prayer meeting and we have one, and it's important that we fast because it's important to God. But it's when people are like, it's important to me first when I meet with God without being seen. Yeah. And it's the hardest thing for us as humans to do that because, we're selfish.
I love that you're seeing it other places too, that's what you're hearing from other people. And that's like, it's almost kind of reaffirms the boiling pot that it's like, it's happening different places. So it's like one group, one church, one organization can't take credit for anything. Yeah. So it's happening in different places. That's great I'm excited to hear that.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. So one more thing we just kind of like to ask people as a fun end question. Okay. So everyone who's listening can judge you. Outside of biblical authors, who are your favorite authors on prayer and fasting?
Prayer and fasting, favorite. I mean, I loved Paul Miller's Praying Life book.
Yeah.
I love that one. So that was really good. I have not read Praying Church yet, but I've heard good things about it. That came out, I think, within the last year. So that was good. Some I remember having to read for a class I took on spiritual awakenings and kind of related to prayer. There's an author, I forget his first name. It's an older name, like a roll or something like that, but it's Holtz, Hullse. And then the name of the book is Give Him No Rest. So I love that, that picture when you think about prayer too. So he talks about the role of prayer and spiritual awakening. There's another older author, Edwin Orr, that has the way prayer connects to spiritual awakening. Is another good author. He's got a book. More recently, Dave Clayton's got an easy-to-read book. What's it called? It's a small yellow one, but it's one we recommended before in this kind of Awaken Houston season. So he's a pastor in Nashville. They do something called Awaken Nashville, and they've got hundreds of churches praying there. Wow. So he wrote a book to go along with it. But the title is escaping. But Dave Clayton is his name.
Dave Clayton, Yellow.
Yellow book. Go find it. Sorry, Dave, if you're listening.
Yellow album.
I forget what it's called. I think it's got Revival in the title. Revival Now, or I don't know.
Love
That's
it.
good.
Yeah. So
Great.
A few resources I found helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just as a quick summary recap, Chad is with Houston Church Planning Network. They are doing a month of fasting and prayer in February. You are welcome to join. We want all of Houston and everywhere else to pray for what God wants to do here. So just get involved. The link is down in the description so you can check it out and see how you can get involved and be praying and fasting with us during the month of February. And other thing, it's important to your church DNA. If you're a church planner or you're involved in a church startup, even if you're involved in a bigger church, like being passionate about building a culture around seeking the face of the Lord, asking Him what He wants to do, interceding with expectancy, that needs to be part of your DNA. And you can be the one who is saying, hey, we need this. Let's do this. Be that voice and be that person who's just excited about it. So thanks for coming on, Chad.
Enjoyed it. Thanks for hanging out,
Thanks,
guys.
man.
All right.
Thanks for the invite.
As a reminder, the Prayer Culture Podcast is a ministry of two or more, which is a crowd-funded ministry. So if you enjoy this content, please check out our website and giving page listed in the description. Also, when you have a second, hit the like and subscribe button.